Good morning, Mark McMaster from Remax Center Realty. By now, I'm sure you've either heard or seen of the settlement between the National Association of Realtors and a select few sellers of real estate across the United States. The lawsuit alleges that sellers were unaware that they were paying their buyer's agent's commission. I could probably make the argument that sellers are not actually paying their buyer's agent's commission, that the listing agent is actually sharing that commission that they receive from the seller with the buyer's agent. You could go even deeper to say that buyers are the only ones actually bringing money to the transaction, so they're essentially paying the seller's agent's commission. If you really want to get nuanced and go in the weeds, you could say that the buyer's employer is the only one paying the commission because that's where the buyer gets their money. That's a joke. You can definitely laugh about that one. Currently, nothing has changed. The settlement hasn't been approved yet, and when it is, changes won't take effect until July. Probably the biggest change in the industry is that the buyer's agent's compensation commission can't be displayed anywhere in the multiple listing service. For sellers, I would say that nothing has really changed. I would still advise any seller that I'm working with to offer compensation to a buyer's agent. Buyer's agents are the ones who are working with buyers and are generally bringing buyers to properties and have the procedures in place to get those properties in front of buyers. The sellers that I've worked with in the past have almost always offered compensation to a buyer's agent, even though they weren't required to. You've never been required to offer compensation to a buyer's agent. It's just the best practice. Sellers that I've worked with in the past have offered anywhere between 2% and 10% to a buyer's agent. Usually what we see is anywhere from 2.25% to 3% in the Center County market. As a seller, if you think you're going to save money by not offering compensation to a buyer's agent, that's probably not what's going to happen. Even if you list your property for less money, say 3% versus 6%, and these are just made up numbers because there is no such thing as a set commission, and commission has always been negotiable. You're probably still going to net the same, because if a buyer has to pay for their buyer's agent's commission, they're just going to pay you less for your property. That's kind of always been the way it worked. If you're paying less and a buyer's agent brings a buyer and they have a buyer agency contract with that buyer, that buyer will pay them 2.5%, and a seller in a for sale by owner, for instance, who isn't offering compensation to a buyer's agent, the buyer's just going to negotiate a little bit harder. The buyer's agent's going to help them negotiate harder, and they're probably just going to pay about 2.5% to 3% less for the property. Also, there's buyers out there that just don't have the money to pay their own agent because that's not how this market has always worked. So they may sit on the sidelines until they've saved enough money, or they'll just go and find a listing where the seller is willing to offer compensation for their agent so they can buy it. And at the end of the day, if there's less buyers in the market, sellers are going to net less money. There's not going to be as many multiple offer situations that drive the prices up. You're going to see less buyers in the market. So prices may actually come down, which will benefit buyers and not necessarily sellers. One of the biggest issues with this settlement, if buyers have to pay their own agents, is with veterans that are using VA loans. The VA loan program does not allow veterans to pay any compensation to their agent at all. So they may not be able to look at your property at all if you're a seller that's not offering compensation, because in no way can they pay their agent any sort of compensation. As a buyer, the biggest change you're going to see with this settlement is that agents are now required to have a written buyer agency contract with every buyer they show homes to. In the past, you may have been able to just make a phone call, reach out to an agent through Zillow, and go look at some homes and not have a buyer agency contract signed. Now, agents are going to be required to have that for every buyer they show homes to. In the past, I've generally done that anyway, but I usually give it 1 or 2 appointments to go look at some homes, see if we're a good fit before we make that longer term commitment. Now, we'll be required as agents to make sure that you've signed a buyer agency contract before you go look at any homes with us. The other change is that some sellers are not going to offer compensation. So you may need to pay your buyer's agents compensation if you want to have representation in the transaction. I think we're going to go through an adjustment period where some sellers are going to try to not offer compensation, but I think we'll settle back into a period where all of the sellers, for the most part, we'll say 95%, will still offer compensation. Agents are just going to have to find a way to transmit that information to each other because we're not allowed to have that in the multiple listing service whatsoever. You could go directly to the listing agent to purchase that home, but keep in mind at that point you will have no compensation. Even if that agent is working as a dual agent, they're actually not being compensated for that, assuming that they're not offering any sort of buyer agency compensation. So that agent will actually be working directly against you to purchase that home. They're working for the seller to get them the absolute best price under the best terms and conditions. While they can't lie to you, they don't have to really provide any help to you whatsoever. Generally speaking, if you have the cash to pay for your own agent, you'll probably be paying less than what the current market values are for homes, based on the fact that at the end of the day, there may be less buyers in the market, there may be less demand for homes, and you may not have to compete with as many people as what we're currently seeing in today's market. At the end of the day, the media will have you believe that the sky is falling. There's nothing new there. That's what they do every day. Real estate agents are going to have to make some adaptations to our policies and procedures and how we do business, but the consumer, for the most part, I don't think is going to see a major change. I tell everyone that the reason I love this job is because there's something new every day, and this is just a perfect example of that. This is just a change that we're going to go through in the real estate market that is going to help us all become better. We're going to change some things for the better, and buyer's agents will have even better representation, I think. If you have any questions on how this settlement will affect you, or if you have any real estate questions in general, I'm always here to help, and I always like talking to each and every one of you. So feel free to reach out any way you want to. You can find us on the web at markmcmaster.com. Check out our podcast, Sell It Faster with McMaster. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Thanks. Have a great day.